Okay, so in the last video we took this and we turned it into various top-down concepts, which just focused on silhouette. But if we've got a strong silhouette, then we can, we've got a good base to start on. And the idea is that we're going to translate a lot of this information into 3D. Before we get there, though, I want to just add a bit more detail. It's still going to be quite rough, but essentially what I want to focus on is value, and also I want to look at trying to develop some sense of rhythm across the object. So these two things work together in that we use value to separate out light and dark, separate out the panels so that they read as being different things, and it just makes them more interesting. But also, as you can see in a lot of things, I've got an example here of a sci-fi gun. You have areas of high detail mixed with areas of kind of like larger surfaces, and these things are broken up: small parts, medium parts, large parts. And what happens is basically as you look at a piece, you get areas of visual rest, and then you get areas of high detail. If you had this kind of detail over the whole thing, it would be a bit overwhelming and you wouldn't be able to read it just as easily. However, if it didn't have a lot of this detail, you wouldn't really perceive it as being particularly realistic, or it wouldn't look like something that actually functioned, or it would just maybe be a bit boring and it wouldn't convey that. So it's a good idea to have a balance between the two things, but what you don't want to have is kind of have, the same amount of detail in one area and then moving across in the same amount of detail in the other area, and it just being really boring. You need something that, in the same way that if you were doing any kind of concept art and you want to try and create areas of rest and you want to have focal points and then kind of, move away from those and allow people their eyes to bounce around the image, and get them to do essentially visual gymnastics around it. We want to do the same kind of thing. We're not going to go to that kind of detail. We're just going to basically lay down some forms over the top of this to get a sense of, how it might play out, so that when we take this shape into 3D Studio Max, we've got something to base it on. Again, with all this stuff, we're keeping it quite loose, and we're assuming that most of the heavy lifting of actually kind of working stuff out is still probably going to happen in 3D. Anyway, let's get this done. So I'm just going to switch those off so they don't distract me. I'm going to focus on this one, and what I'm going to do is I want to create a kind of like base color for it, and then I'm going to pull away from it. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill this layer with a slightly darker grey than we've got, so it stands out a bit. I'm going to fill it, and obviously that covers everything above it, and I'm going to hold Alt down and I'm going to click on the layer below, which is the layer that we were working on. Now this basically creates a thing called a clipping mask, and you can see they're doing the little arrow thing, and that basically means it's going to connect to it. And basically what a clipping mask does is it takes the layer below and the transparency around that object and basically uses it as a mask. So everything that's attached to it above it from now on will be clipped by it, which basically means I can draw, if I pick a different colour now, I could draw through this and it wouldn't go outside the extents of the silhouette underneath, which is really, really useful when you're doing this kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to start with. Now, the next part is I want to be able to take away from this layer and expose the layer underneath, the dark layer underneath, and that's going to be my other value. So that's kind of going to be the if you imagine this is going to be like the plating over the top of the spaceship, and then what's exposed underneath is going to be more like what we've got here with these kind of like darker areas here where the actual guts are exposed, that kind of setup. So how I'm going to do that is within this grey area, as much as this has been clipped by that, this doesn't actually have a mask itself. So what I'm going to do is, to create something that's non-destructive, and it means that I can play with it a bit more, I'm going to create a mask on this layer. So if I click mask, it will create a mask, and it's not masking anything at the minute, which is good because that's what we want. So if I go into, get a little bit closer, I don't want to get too close because I don't want to be tempted to put too much detail in. I've got some jazz going on there, I don't know what that is. So in this mask, if I want to be able to carve into it, and then I'm going to need to use a brush pen and I need to set this to black. If I paint with black, it will basically remove it. If I hit X, which will swap this back to being white, I can basically paint the mask back in, paint it out, whichever way you want to look at it. So essentially by hitting X, I can remove and then I can paint it back in again. And it's completely non-destructive. I can get rid of this mask now, I can delete it. We're back to where we were. So it's a really, if you don't use them, they're really, really useful. Okay, so what I want to do is start to separate these things out. I don't want them, I want to have some small areas, some kind of medium areas, a big area, that kind of thing. So what I'm imagining is this is the wing area, maybe. So I'm going to just start off really quickly by cutting into here, maybe having this as one of the dark bits, like that, and then hit X to get the black up, and so what I've got is I've got this. Now I probably want to let a little bit more of that back in again, so this is where it's useful. I hit X and then I can just start to, I'm holding shift down, I'm going to get rid of some of that. Again, I'll keep coming back to this. I'm going to put a mark in there because I want these eventually to be something that swivels. I'm going to go with that. And I'm basically just going to go around finding areas that I can do things in. I'm also only going to do 1/2, and then I'm going to copy it across. So I want to focus on this half, so actually I could probably just go ahead and get rid of some of this stuff so I'm not worrying about it, and I'll copy it across. I mean, that'll do for now. It's by no means perfect. Gives an indication of what's happening. So that's a good start. So what I'm going to do is going to make a copy of it. Control F to flip it, and as you can see, that's nowhere near where we need it to be. So I'm going to hold Shift down. I'm just going to drag all to the right, and it will come. You can see it move in here. But it will come at some point. There we go. So there might be a few changes we want to make over the top just to tidy it up, so we just walk into there and just add those. I want to do a little maybe follow that up with one in there as well to match it. Again, I'm working on the principle that I'm not a slave to any of this stuff. I don't have to keep it. Yeah. And then maybe do the same thing in there as well. To both sides. It's a bit annoying. Okay, so I'll go with that. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add just a few little split lines just to indicate some things, but again, not anything that I'm going to be a slave to. I'm just going to create a new layer. Do this a bit more simply. Black. I'm actually going to set the layer opacity to probably in the 60s so that it's not totally black, and just so the intensity of it's not quite the same. And then I am going to make it a bit thinner, and I'm going to start drawing on the surface, and I want to make it a clipping. I want it to clip like the rest of the thing, so I'm just going to hold Alt down and go onto this layer, and that will clip all the way through until it gets to that bottom layer. So now if I draw, you can see that it's doing anything. And then what I am going to do, and you see me playing around with this before probably, is I'm just going to turn the smoothing on. Basically the way the smoothing works is it's like a lazy mouse, if you've ever used anything like that. So if I draw without the smoothing, I can just do really rough. I mean, I'm drawing with a mouse at the minute, which is why this stuff's a bit rough. But if I turn the smoothing on, so if I turn it on to like 66, and I've got the pull string mode on here at the minute, if I switch that off, what you can see is it basically follows where I'm pressing it. So you get a much smoother result. You can't really do tons of erratic stuff with it very easily, but for doing this sort of stuff, that's not what I want. It's actually really useful. So I'll just make that a little bit smaller again. So okay, so as you can see, that now start to get a bit more form and definition in it, and it's not so got busier areas, and it's got areas which have got less going on, and there's a better arrangement of things. So that's probably enough to get started with. And the last thing I'm going to do, just to kind of finish it off, is I'm just going to add a little gradient to it, which will just make it look a little bit more like an actual finished thing. So to do that, I'm just going to create a new layer on the top, and I'm just going to go do a selection around that, and I'm transparent and doing black to white, and I'm just going to hold shift down and drag. That'll drag a gradient from black through to nothing. But it's a bit intense, so I'm just going to pull it right down. Maybe actually pull the... And then all I'm going to do is just go back in quickly and just lighten up these slightly. Actually, that's not bad doing it with colour. And they'll be exactly the same. Okay. actual background a bit darker, a bit lighter maybe. There we go. So yeah, I think that's probably a good start for taking it to the next stage. So now what I'm going to do is you could add colour to that if you wanted to, but I think I'm going to start trying to explore this in 3D and then see where that takes me. It's at that sort of stage where you kind of, you could put colour all over it and then realise that actually it's not really going to work that way anyway. So there we go. Hopefully that's useful.